The innate immune response is a general response that your immune system has against foreign invaders. And there are special cells involved in the process. In this video, we're going to dig into those cells and the roles they play. So let's do it. Hey, this is Leslie Samuel here from Interactive Biology TV, where we're making biology fun. And we're talking about the cells of the innate immune response. But first, a quick review. Something foreign enters your body. Your immune system doesn't like that. It wants to get rid of that invader, whether it's a bacteria, virus, or some other pathogen. There's a quick initial response that doesn't care what specific invader it is. It's a non-specific response. And by non-specific, here's what we mean. If it's inside and it doesn't belong to you, we want it gone. It's not you, so bye-bye. And then there's a slower response that does care what the specific antigen is. In fact, its response is specifically tailored to specific pathogens. Man, that's a whole lot of specific. But for more info on this idea of non-specific versus specific, see my video on the introduction to the immune system. I'll also make another video pretty soon comparing the two in more depth. So make sure you're subscribed for when that comes out. In this video, we're looking at that quick initial response that's more general in nature. Something's bad inside, and we want to get rid of whatever it is. And there are a number of cells that are involved in this process, and we'll look at them right now. The first category of cells is called a phagocyte. These are cells that have the ability to engulf foreign particles. The word phagocyte literally means eating cell. They'll eat the potentially harmful substance, take it inside themselves with the goal of destroying it. Now, there are two main phagocytes, the macrophages and the neutrophils. Macrophages are phagocytes that have an irregular shape. And what's cool about these macrophages is that they can leave the circulatory system by squeezing through the walls of the capillaries. Because they can do this, they can roam through the tissues, and when they encounter a pathogen, they do what they do. They will basically eat up that pathogen using a process called phagocytosis. It's like Pac-Man eating those dots in the game. You know what I mean. Now, depending on where you find these macrophages in the body, you might see them called by different names. If they're in the lungs, they're called alveolar macrophages. If they're in the liver, they're called Kupffer cells. And if they're in the connective tissue, they're called histiocytes. Don't let all the names confuse you. They're all basically macrophages. I just want you to know about these names just in case you see them in a textbook. You know what it's talking about. Macrophages also have another function. They can release these signaling molecules known as cytokines, and those cytokines will attract other immune cells to the area. Picture the macrophages kind of like security guards in the mall. Someone's trying to cause damage in a mall or trying to steal something. They catch the person and they try to deal with them. And they can also use their little walkie-talkies to call other guards and even the police if necessary. That's like the macrophages first doing what they do, phagocytosis, and then sending out cytokines to bring in the reinforcements. Okay, the next type of phagocyte that's part of the innate immune response is the neutrophil. These are granulocytes, meaning they have granules inside their cytoplasm. They're basically little containers or vesicles that have stuff inside them. In the case of the neutrophils, they have things like histamines and other substances. Neutrophils are very good at dealing with things like bacteria and fungi. You can think of these as the police officers that are called in by the signals from the security guards. They have receptors on their surfaces that will detect the cytokines and other substances that are released by different cells, and they'll respond by coming into the area, eating stuff up, releasing histamines to trigger inflammation, and other substances like antimicrobials to fight against bacteria. Then there are monocytes. Monocytes are interesting cells. They aren't fully developed. In fact, they are precursor cells that have the ability to differentiate and become either a macrophage or a dendritic cell. And we'll talk about dendritic cells a little later. The idea here is that they're circulating in the blood, and depending on the signals they receive when there's some kind of pathogen, they can become what they need to become so that they can best help the situation and try to get rid of that potentially harmful substance. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty cool. Next, we have the mast cells. You can find these in connective tissue and also in mucous membranes. Now, these are going to play a very important role when there's a cut. It helps with the healing process and with protection against pathogens. Let's say you get a cut. Mast cells in that area are going to get activated and they'll release cytokines and other substances that cause inflammation. Things like histamine. Anytime you hear histamine, I want you to think inflammation. The idea is we're trying to get more blood to the area so that we can bring in more of the recruits, get more of those immune system cells here to fight off infection and to promote healing, which is a good thing. Okay, now let's get to the eosinophils. These cells are involved in fighting against parasites and bacteria, but they're also active when dealing with allergic reactions. They are also granulocytes, so that means that they have substances in their granules, and in this case, they are toxic to both bacteria and parasites. Now, here's the issue. When eosinophils release their granules into the tissues to fight against a parasite or something else, those chemicals can also cause damage to our own tissues. So the process of releasing granules needs to be regulated. Next, we have basophils. Once again, a granulocyte. You know what that means? They have granules, and the granules have stuff inside of them. In this case, we're also dealing with histamine, which causes inflammation, especially when we're dealing with allergic reactions. Okay, we have two more cells to cover. The next one is the natural killer cells, or NK cells. These cells are different in that they don't directly attack the pathogen. Instead, they detect when a cell has been infected by a pathogen and trigger a process called apoptosis, which basically means cellular death. They have granules inside that release substances like perforins and granzymes. The perforins will basically perforate the cell wall, making holes throughout the membrane, and the granzymes are going to enter the cell to trigger apoptosis, killing the cell. This works very well when a cell has been infected, like with a virus. One more cell, the dendritic cell. I mentioned this one earlier when I showed that they can develop from monocytes. These cells are also called antigen-presenting cells. They're present in tissues that are in direct contact with the external environment. Places like the skin, the lining of the nose and the lungs, the stomach, and the intestines. Since they're exposed to the external environment, they often identify pathogens and present them to the rest of the immune system, triggering a non-specific inflammatory response. It's kind of like they take up the bad stuff and then present it all to the other cells saying, hey, this is bad stuff, kill it. But they'll also present them to B and T cells to trigger a specific immune response. And because of this, they're often seen as a bridge between the innate and the adaptive immune responses. So those are the cells that are involved in innate immunity. You know, I don't mention this enough. This is a lot of info. And fortunately, we take notes of all this stuff and we put it on our blog so that you can always review them at your own leisure. I'll link to the post for this episode in the description below. Now, in the next video, we're going to dig into adaptive immunity a little bit more. Specifically, we're going to start by looking at the T cells and how they function. But that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!